the report from Mr. Duffield, Charlottesville Redevelopment and Housing Authority Fund update.
Mayor Walker, members of council, thank you for taking time for me this evening. In your council packets this evening, behind item 7, you have a funding drawdown request from Charlottesville Redevelopment Housing Authority to draw down part of the CIP set-aside that council earlier in 2017 established for CRHA. The intent of the drawdown request is to help fund capital expenses related to modernization of certain existing properties units within the CRHA portfolio. In so doing, we'll be able to support a jobs training program through materials and project oversight costs. The funding drawdown request also encompasses contractual expenses that CRHA has incurred in the renovation of these certain units. A total of 23 units that are currently offline. 10 of the 23 have required structural improvements requiring contractor services. We have procured those services, and actually those that work has been completed as of this date. The cost of that has been $81,032. And CRHA would request a drawdown of those funds. We'd also request a drawdown of $110,000 to support the jobs trainings program through provision for expenses related to materials, contingency contractor services, a certain amount of project oversight provided by Habitat for Humanity, and contingency related to the overall project. Mayor Walker, do you care for further detail? Does that suffice to bring the issue to the table?
Well, I just had a question about the,
Certainly.
Kathy, the Section 3.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
So is that a different set?
Yeah, the Section 3 program will be supported out of the part of it will be supported out of the $110,000 drawdown. We won't fund direct labor expenses related to the job training. As you may be aware, the Section 3 program that we have proposed in conjunction with FAR and Habitat for Humanity will involve recruiting and training residents in apartment maintenance and renovation. The funding that's requested here will provide the materials side of that. The direct labor expenses are not included.
So that $50,000 is still needed too?
That's correct.
Okay.
Yes,
Thank you.
ma'am. No.
That was
Thank
my
you.
question. Thank you, Mayor Walker.
So excuse me, I have a couple of questions which either Mr. Duffield you could answer, or Mr. Jones, some combination. So I'm extremely sympathetic to what this money would accomplish, and we did set out to commit these funds. I just want to study it against the backdrop of but a lot of citizens don't know this, the design of these two bodies. This is an independent housing authority that's vested with the power to fund itself, that has a separate stream of money that goes to the federal government, which we don't have, that goes to the housing authority. There had been prior times when city council was the housing authority. Currently, they're separate bodies. And as I understand it, one of the reasons to do redevelopment is because in that current institutional design, the housing authorities are finding themselves not sustainable funding-wise because the federal government has lifted up support, and because so to do that, that's why they redevelop. What I'm concerned, interested about is that, like, we don't want to, I would think maybe we do, but the system isn't set up for us to be providing continuing revenue to an independent housing authority. And if this gets into that situation where, you know, then that would decrease the reason to redevelop, which is like when we've talked in this body, and I've heard it from the community, it's like one of the number one goals, and it's been delayed for a long time. We were talking about redeveloping 3 years ago when we were all running for council. We just, it comes up a lot, and any commitment that comes up that will slow down that very difficult process, and it hasn't happened because it's hard, and we've talked a lot about this, so I'm just trying to think this through against all those different concerns while trying to do the right thing and help people. And so one question is, what's the background of financial commitments like this that the city has made to the Housing Authority? When and where have we helped out? Do we have any criteria for when we have done this, like over the last 5 or 10 years? I know I've only been on council for, you have a longer memory than I do, but I know that there's been a couple times, but have we done it for things like this where it's, distinct capital expenses, maintenance? Because as I understood, the deciding to do this $2.5 million, that was really meant to help with redevelopment, which we all are on the same page with doing. So I would like to know some history on precedent for this, I guess. And then I'd also like to know, how do you respond to that bigger concern that I've laid out?
Certainly, and let me do that by taking sort of a step back.
Sure.
And saying I would absolutely welcome the opportunity to meet with council in the near future, and let's get caught back up on the redevelopment discussion.
Sure.
Overall. There's been a tremendous amount of work that's been done recently, a lot of work, much thanks to FAR and some community engagement leadership there. That ball is much further, it's moved much further forward than it has in quite some time. So, yeah, Mayor Walker and council, if there's an opportunity to meet and have that discussion, either in this setting or in a separate setting, I'd welcome that, okay? Yeah, I certainly understand the issue around redevelopment and the need to redevelop. Where we are today is we're faced with a situation in which we have 23 units that we are unable to make available to individuals who very much need housing. We have a public housing waiting list that is over 1,200 families deep. So 23 units isn't going to make a big difference on that list, right? But it's going to make a big difference to the 23 families that need it today. The other piece is, again, how you perceive redevelopment in and of itself. We look at redevelopment as more than simply bricks and mortar. This is an opportunity to help create job skills opportunities, help individuals and families and communities develop through the redevelopment process. I don't know that I can point to a specific prior project in which council has provided capital funds. I certainly don't envision this as a situation of any kind of recurring capital maintenance request that you would see out of CRHA. The truth of the matter is if council chooses not to fund this, that's as certainly is council's prerogative. It will simply mean that these units will stay offline for, I think it's probably 3 years or so before we'd be able to cycle that using the capital funds that we get from HUD. Now, those funds
because
have been...
so you don't have capital, you don't have sufficient capital funds basically on your model to do this work with these units. They're just sitting...
Not immediately.
Okay.
Okay. So over time, yeah, but I'm not sure, obviously. Who knows what future challenges we have. Yeah, I know my housing stock isn't getting any newer.
Mr. Jones, is there any other, just not putting this, but just any background in other times that council has helped financially with CRHA? I know that there was the time, like 3 or 4 years ago, that I heard about where there was a planning grant or...
There's been planning grants.
Yeah, there's been
And then there's been-
workforce programs that we've helped, pilot workforce programs that we've helped to fund. Right now, we're funding a self-sufficiency specialist position that the council agreed to several years ago. We've provided funding for a maintenance supervisor in the past, those types of things. And we have provided some funding for some capital needs. I think we helped with some playground equipment and things like that a few years ago.
Yes.
So there periodically, we have provided funding to help in certain situations. As everybody knows, you know, HUD has been cutting budgets for a number of years now, and that's one of the reasons that we stepped in and tried to help fill some of those voids a few years ago, and we're trying to do the same thing. I think with helping with redevelopment in the future, that's why the council made the pretty significant commitment to help get CRHA started. But sometimes you have to deal with the bleeding first before you can deal with the long-term, the long-term issues that someone may be dealing with, and I think that's what we're trying to deal with right now.
Certainly, and certainly from our community standpoint, there has been very clear directive from the community that says, yeah, redevelopment is absolutely important, and we need to push that quickly. There's also, we need to make certain that we're stabilizing as best we can the existing housing stock for those families that are currently in.
So,
And from the, there's only one of the units that would be in this, the request for funding that's at Crescent Halls, right?
That's
And the
correct.
redevelopment process would start with, based on the discussion with Crescent Halls. So we still would, like, long-term, be talking about funding, this funding request would go to the developments that would come after, because the community, well, from the discussions I've heard, it's been decided that the redevelopment efforts would start with Crescent Halls.
our
Correct.
redevelopment committee is said as such.
Yeah.
I think it's important also to note, last year, when we originally talked about it in the budget in regards to putting this money into, or allocating these funds through the equity package to kind of give CRHA a jump start, yeah, we were talking about redevelopment, but I think, I mean, again, these units, the ones that need this major significant help, it's going to take, redevelopment is not something that's gonna happen like next week. And it's gonna take so long. I mean, again, I think we're further along than we've been in a long, long, long time. But these units are 23 units that we can bring online that we can help people now. And I don't want us to be the barrier to us stopping that. I understand that we have to do good governance. I'm not saying that, Mr. Signer, you're saying that you want to stop it. I just think that we shouldn't allow certain things to stop us from helping people now, especially if we've already allocated the funds. And when I mean, being frank, when I originally said, like, all right, this is kind of the route we want to go, or like I would like for us to go in terms of putting these monies aside, yeah, it was for redevelopment, but it was also for, like, the whole overarching goal was to help people and get them kind of in a better situation than they've been. Got all kinds of calls, emails, text messages from families of 3 or 4 or 5 who are essentially homeless.
Yeah.
They could be put in some of these units that are offline now. I think we don't need to continue to belabor that.
And I think also, and I said it at our retreat, about the city making a, major commitment. I mean, we're gonna have to figure out how to help them come up with the funding to even make sure redevelopment happens. And I think we're gonna have to figure out how to make that a part of our long-term plan, even though they're supposed to be a separate entity. We know that the funding is not there, and if we can figure that out, we have to make sure that we figure it out, whatever that looks like.
And as we learned on Friday, it might take 17 different sources to get there.
Right.
Yeah.
If I could just say, too, that, 5 years ago when we had these conversations, there was absolutely no relationship between FAR and the management team. And there was no progress in any way, visible anyway, in terms of coming to some understanding and agreement about how to proceed with redevelopment. And so the skepticism that the Housing Authority might have heard from the council at that time was directly related to the fact it was not at all clear that there was a partnership within the Housing Authority and amongst its residents that a redevelopment program could be executed. I personally have seen a major change in that, and And it's evidenced by just coming up with innovative programs like the Section 3 program. And it's using residents themselves to actually rebuild those units. So I think that's the big change that I've seen, is that there's actually a partnership that's living and breathing at the Housing Authority now. So I'm willing as a counselor to invest in that and keep it moving. It would help, I think, just for the budget and for understanding how we're going to need to plan for this, from my perspective, is to see what is the near-term, mid-term, and long-term investments that we're going to need to make to get you from today to a redeveloped future. And this, to me, is a near-term stage. We absolutely need to get these units online. We need to get residents trained so that they're competitive in the job market. But then what's the next phase?
Sure. No, and again, I think that we are in a much better position to answer some of those questions and collectively lay out a path forward than we have certainly since I've been here. And I will speak to your point, Councilor Godwin. I can't say enough, the relationship with FAR has been outstanding. And I think it's, from my perspective, it began maybe prior to, but certainly with the positive vision for redevelopment that FAR developed, and the cooperative spirit with which everyone has come around the table in the redevelopment process thus far. It has been amazing to be a part of that process.
Thank you.
Okay. Thank you very much.
So council, report for tonight, we're not voting this evening. If it seems like there's general support from the council, and if that's the case, then we would put this on the consent agenda
Thank
for the next meeting.
Thank you.
Okay. Other business?
So I have an item that I'd like to discuss with my colleagues for other business. There's been a great deal of discussion, kind of on par with what we just heard from Mr. Duffield about getting people into units. And after council's decision in regards to the West Second at our last council meeting, I'd like to request that we bring that item back on the second meeting in March. It appears that based on some communications I've had with staff as well as others, that there may indeed be an opportunity for us to create more affordable housing units as part of that project. And personally for me, I want to ensure that we can get as many units as possible. And if that becomes more of a possibility, specifically in regards to meeting AMI requirements and making it more affordable for a variety of people, in addition to looking at different ways that we could potentially use some of the additional tax revenue, I'm definitely interested in listening. So again, my request would be for Mayor Walker as well as my colleagues to place the West Second situation back on our council agenda for the second meeting in March.
I'm in agreement with that, Mr. Burnley.
Me as well.
Me as well.
Okay. Are we voting?
No.
No.
So, Lisa, your memo said that someone who voted against the agreement could bring it back not within the time. Was that the case?
So there's a couple of different paths.
Okay.
That would only be the case if you choose to use a motion for reconsideration, but that would have, the motion for reconsideration usually has to happen at the next meeting.
Mm-hmm.
But you can also consider it, the motion that was brought forward at the last meeting failed, so you all still have to take action of some sort.
Mm-hmm.
So you can bring it forward in March for a new motion, and based on some different circumstances, some additional, arrangements or, some changes to the application itself. So there's a couple of different paths forward, but technically you haven't acted yet, so you can still do that. So it does not, the motion would not necessarily have to be by a person who voted in the majority.
So I've asked in meetings that if the original SUP that was approved, if Mr. Woodard decided not to go with that, what could that potential land use space, that land be used for? And what would putting another RFP out look like? And if there was a possibility to get even more affordable housing than possibly projected. And also there were still concerns with the city market so it wasn't just the affordable housing piece, even though that's a major piece. So I've had those conversations about what else could that site look like other than the West 2nd Street project, and I'm still holding on to that.
So procedurally, if there are four counselors who want to put it on the agenda.
Oh, I understand. I'm just making it clear that I'm not one of the
Your
four.
position.
But that's a whole other, that may
Yeah.
be something that,
Yeah.
I wonder if there's
Okay.
you might be able to bring that up, whatever you get in your comments.
Well,
we get
that
to
was
share it
all
with the rest
based
of us.
on whether the original SUP that was approved moved forward, which it didn't look, it seemed like he was going to.
Right.
And so then that would be moving us back to the drawing board about what that
Right.
space could look like. And we don't know in terms of affordable housing unit, permanent house for the city market, or potential revenue that could be made because we haven't, extended that. So those were the questions that I've been asking
Yeah.
before and since we voted against.
Yeah, I wholeheartedly respect that. Just in my position, again, I'm an individual, just based off my experiences since being up here, and then also in conjunction with serving on the Housing Authority Board, and just communications that I have, I'm a firm believer that we need to try and get units built quickly to get people in those units, and I think there's also, there's the ability for us to be able to do some of the very things that we were discussing during that last meeting with Mr. Woodard. I believe that in terms of affordable housing, AMI and whatnot, there are some different ways that we can achieve our goal. And I want us again to be able to get people into units sooner rather than later.
And I
So,
understand, my
Yes, ma'am.
conversations with Mr. Woodard, there wasn't a plan, a firm plan for the Harris Street properties. There hadn't been any plan. Did anyone see plans? So we could potentially be at the same space, but there's already a 4-to-1, so we can
Yes, ma'am.
go home.
And if I'd just like to ask Mr. Jones, one more thing though, before we have another matters by the public, but Mr. Jones and I met this morning, and I raised the question about the proposal that I put forth a couple of meetings ago, or was it last meeting? I can't remember now, about
The tax zone.
using the tax increment finance approach to capture that differential of revenue and dedicate it to housing or whatever we deem in conjunction with the adjacent neighborhood that's most impacted by the corridor. And it was patterned after that Columbia Pike example in Arlington County, Virginia. But I feel that would really make an impact on our ability to dedicate funds to our most pressing needs.
And you
And-
might, sorry.
And I get that part too, and that's understandable, but when we ask the developers the question of what's the difference between the revenue of the existing SUP approval and their increase, how it was a $50,000 difference.
Right, I hear
So
you.
there would still be considerable, if they were able to build the original SUP, we would still be getting $900,000 a year to revenue. So we still have to weigh in the factors of the benefit to us overall and to the community. And if something else went into that space, it could generate revenue as well. And we don't know how much because we haven't looked at that. And any development that excludes people, which they are doing off-site units, but they're still the, it's not inclusive. And again, there were still city market questions. So I still have a lot of questions, but if Lisa is saying that this could be brought back and there's a 4-1, then we can go to matters by the public.
I just certainly want to support the discussion, because I think it's a valuable discussion to continue. And regarding the market, obviously that was a sticking point for me, in addition, just to design, but market was a big piece because that was part of the original RFP. I've certainly had a number of conversations in the last 2 weeks that have been, both initiated and not initiated, not by me and others, just to try to understand where that is, and I'm happy to share that with any of my colleagues, both perspective from staff members as well as from the vendor public, as some of this has continued to be worked through, so.
And I would like to add one thing on to Ms. Galvin's point, and to what Mr. Bellamy and Mayor Walker have talked about, which is that, so setting aside the idea of a TIF, which may be more, it just seems, without having briefed on it, might be more complicated because we have to pass, I think, a different regime. But I would like to know about that alongside making this decision. But Mr. Jones, you raised the possibility the other time that we could just say we're going to raise the housing, affordable housing fund budget by this amount. I would like to know whether, I know that we can't bind a future council, but it seems like we could say in the passing of this, so it's in the minutes and it's alongside, that we intend in the passing of this to have all of the increased tax revenue go toward affordable housing. Because it's a city property, it's a unique thing. That to me would be, I would like to know from staff what are our options for basically directing the increase once it comes online toward the affordable housing fund. Because we would increase our spend by 30% with $900,000. It would be, if we could do that. However, I don't want to set up an obstacle where we delay. We don't want this to be a contingency under.
Well, I think there's other things going on with this project that's already under the existing kind of SEP, Charlottesville Affordable Housing Fund scenario that is providing us with affordable housing. So I see these as two separate things. But I do think that it's a strategy that we need to be moving forward with, so that the public and so that our staff and are seeing clearly that the redevelopment revenue is tied to community benefits, period.
But so on this one, I guess I'm narrowing it. I would, if there's support, I would like to be advised on, can we say that every dollar that we get from doing this project goes toward the
Why just
affordable
that
housing
one?
fund? Because it's a unique property, because it's being built on city property through a city RFP, and affordable housing now is the #1 community concern that has been the overlay on this. That's what we're hearing from our colleagues, and it seems like a unique situation. So I think it's worth treating specially. So you would basically,
I think if there's a will in council.
If there's a will in council, there may not
If there's will
be.
in council to do that, we could certainly come back with kind of the pros and cons of doing this type of thing.
Right.
And
I would
allow
like that.
council to make a decision based on that.
Yeah, there's a great deal of potential tax revenue that could come in, but it's similar to what we've heard before when this RFP was originally created. We've heard from colleagues saying that, at that time, affordable housing wasn't the #1 priority. Now it's
Maybe the
much
schools
more.
needed more. I know.
Yeah, so I mean,
Yeah, and if-
although it should have always, again, on hindsight, it's always 20/20. But when we heard even from the schools, the funding that's needed there, we know that there's a need for more minority teachers. We know there's a need for housing for different. There's a lot of
That would be the
competing
counter-argument.
needs.
Yeah.
Yeah, but again, my #1 priority right now is units.
And I just want to say,
Affordable units
if
for
they're going
those
to
in
provide
need.
units off-site, the reason why on-site's not possible is because we took out, with the criteria established 4 years ago, 22,000 square feet of land area. It's an L-shaped building that is completely unable to do all those things at once. And in doing that, the scale of the building is reduced too. It's not when you look at the footprint, it's not much bigger than the footprint of even the Midway Manor's footprint, when you look at it. It's not a massive building, but it did take away an awful lot of their buildable area.
I appreciate you saying that, because that was certainly something that I've been reflecting on, but I've had to keep it separate because we're at a point where we're just looking at an SUP amendment on something that's largely been decided, and so it's just it's a pretty narrow thing that we're looking at. But I certainly agree with that point. I feel like we really are expecting a lot out of a partial lot, because we also want to achieve this market piece, which is what the original RFP was for, and times do change.
Yeah, we've talked a great deal about it. There's four in regards to moving on.
Yep.
I gotta get home.
Yeah, I gotta get up at 5 o'clock tomorrow, drive to Richmond. So lobby in front of the Senate committee again.
Good luck with that. Some matters, or
Okay.
Mayor?
Matters by the public. Any comments?
Morning, Walt Heineke, 1521 Amherst Street. Several years ago, under the leadership of Holly Edwards, the city started a dialogue on race. You had about 600 people, citizens from this community, engaged in trying to figure out how to solve racial inequities and racial problems in this town. Part of that process was, at the end of that process, was for citizens to come up with ideas for policy recommendations and changes. The two ones that were prominent in the work that I did there were a request by citizens to have a place to take their complaints of racial discrimination, primarily on housing and employment, and have those complaints heard and resolved by a Human Rights Commission. You started a Human Rights Commission, you started an Office of Human Rights, you staffed it, and you basically wrote the community a check. And that check has bounced. And it's time to figure out how you've reneged on that promise. And the way that you've done that is you've basically let the civil rights attorney that ran that office go and not replaced her. You promised to bring the EEOC in from Richmond regularly, and you failed to do that, and you've let that go. So now that intention of the Human Rights Commission has now been eviscerated by the city's actions, by affirmative actions, right? So at this point, you have a choice to fulfill that promise or to say, yep, we made a promise and we reneged on it and we're not going to fulfill it, right? And so we have a budget cycle going on here, and it's simple. All you have to do is put $100,000 in the budget for a couple of years to hire a civil rights attorney to replace the last one we had, and to fix the ordinance so that it reads that you can, the Human Rights Commission can investigate complaints of housing discrimination and employment discrimination in companies that are over 15 in terms of the number of employees. It's a simple fix. You've failed in the last couple of years to actually make good on the promise. What I'm asking you, and I think the community's asking you to do, is put the $100,000 investment in and give it 2 years, and let's see if it actually works. Let's see if the actual intention works, right? You've done it the wrong way. Let's try it the right way. Enforcement of human rights is a local thing. You can't outsource it to Richmond. It has to be local for the community to actually trust the process. And this is your chance to fix something that you've messed up on before. And I'm totally with Councilor Bellamy on affordable housing units and getting people in those units. But when we get those people in those units, and if they're denied employment and raises and those kinds of things, what good? How can they stay in those units, right? If they're denied access to dwellings, and they're kicked out because of what landlords do and other affordable housing opportunities, what good is our affordable housing process? We need a Human Rights Commission with teeth. You can fix it. Just do it. Give it 2 years, and let's see how it works.
Thank you. Any other comment?
I just have four quick points. One, again, we'll see where the community discussion goes, but I know one of the top names for renaming Emancipation Justin Park was Monacan Park, and it just made me think, I think just a couple weeks ago, the federal government recognized the Monacan tribe for the first time, so I think that's just maybe a point to consider. Again, we'll see where the community discussion goes, but immediate thought I had is just, it might be important to, if the parks are renamed, to have it be something that is tied locally and particularly tied to local history that's been erased. It might be, at least in my opinion, a negative if it was just made something bland like Library Park that has no real specificity to city history. Second point is, again, a long-term thing, but an AP report and lots of other reports that Cape Town, South Africa is about to become the first major city in the world to run out of water. I think in the next 1 to 2 months the city is expected to run out of water, and they're going to start rationing it. Again, that's an AP report, lots of other reports. Point being, the city has about $160 million in investments. New York City recently divested from fossil fuels. I think it may be something worth considering for the city. I know the city divested as part of the divestment from apartheid movement. It may be something worth considering for the city with fossil fuel companies, with climate change increasingly becoming, a serious global threat. Third point is, I know in the city budget process there was sort of an informal agreement for $250,000 to the Downtown Business Association. $100,000 of that was for social media and PR. $100,000 was for full-time staff or an office space. $50,000 was for physical developments. The physical development seems reasonable enough to me, but I have a lot of questions about that $100,000 for PR. Who specifically is that going to? Are there specific firms, specific individuals? Is that outside of city staff? Likewise, I'm unsure whether $100,000 for a staffer just for the Downtown Business Association makes sense, especially as was brought up when we have a need for new staff related to the Human Rights Commission. So just something I'd like to see more information about. And fourth, finally, is I know we were a very narrow, specific thing brought up about the William Taylor Plaza development project. But the history of that, I have a lot of questions about it that I think raise larger questions about development in the city. That was in 2008, I think, sold to a private developer, made to a planning, I forget PUD, I forget what the acronym is. But to allow, development to be easier in some ways. The original goal was to have mixed-use housing plus public use. The developer totally changed that to have it be a Marriott hotel in a residential area near Fifeville, and then 27 market rate units. The Planning Commission voted unanimously not to approve a request to make development changes they wanted as part of the hotel. City Council voted 3-2 to allow it anyway, and community delivered petition of over 500 people against it. Again, it raises a lot of questions, just questions in general I have, and I know a lot of that is out of the control of City Council. A lot of this goes down to our zoning, but I think it's just emblematic of something that's happening, and I would be curious to have a discussion of if this is what's routinely happening, why is the city selling land it owns to for-profit developers? Why is our zoning prevent us from...
Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you.
Any other comments?
Mr. Payne, if I could see you afterwards, my daughter is trying to raise money for efforts for South Africa and the water efforts, and I've spoken with an ambassador over there, so let's get together.
Thanks. Brandon Collins. I work for FAR, Public Housing Association of Residents, duly elected, duly recognized Resident Advisory Council and Resident Advisory Board for residents of public housing here in Charlottesville. And I know you're tired, so I'm not going to even do the whole 3 minutes. I did want to supplement some of the things that Mr. Duffield brought to your attention. The first, I think it's really important that, and not everybody really kind of gets this. So the public housing proper, 376 homes administered by the Housing Authority. Their operating budget is around $2.5 million, I believe, of which residents' rent pays about half of that. The rest is subsidy. The capital budget provided by the federal government is less than $500,000, and that may be a little different this year coming up, but and probably worse. So we're talking about very small amount of money that comes from the federal government for capital funding for the Housing Authority, and that's a big reason why it's very difficult to get anything done. We're focused on improving operations in the short term is difficult enough, but then when you have 20 20 homes that just can't be lived in, and I know Mr. Bellamy visited some of those homes as we were looking at them. I mean, they need to come online. And certainly thank you all for the support on that. Another thing I think is good to realize, Housing Authority has passed two really important resolutions. One was that redevelopment efforts and planning should focus on the population of Crescent Halls and meeting their needs as a starting point. And that is definitely where, when we think about redevelopment, that's the kind of thing we're thinking about, full-scale new homes for people. But they also passed a second resolution that said, you know, there are other public housing that we have that may take some time to get to the point where they get full-scale redevelopment, and there may actually be some spots that we have that a modernization effort could be highly successful. So they support this idea of a parallel track of modernization and rehab of units, and hopefully this is a little bit of a start on that. I think it's a little larger scale, but I think that should be in your thinking as you're thinking about how the city engages with the Housing Authority, that it's not just tearing down and building all the time, that there is this idea of a parallel effort. Certainly the focus is on the population of Crescent Halls and getting folks properly housed as a way to really make things move forward. And I appreciate y'all noticing the partnership. We're all working super, super hard on this. So trust us when we can come to you, Housing Authority and FAR, and we're saying the same things. Trust us that we really think that that's the way to go forward. So thank you.
Thank you. Any other? All right, meeting adjourned.
Thank you.